Dr. Roger Keebold. Welcome to our program, The Gospel According to Dr. Roger, where you receive, and maybe only hear, the absolute unvarnished truth about everything. The real story about all the stories and people in the news, and the same thing is true of my guests. We really tell you like it is. So if you want to know what's really happening and what you really need to be aware of, tune in every Friday at 6 p.m. London time, British Summer Time, if you can call this summer, to the Gospel According to Dr. Roger. Now, today, our guest is somebody I like very much. He is Swedish and British. His unusual name is Pelle, P-E-L-L-E, Neroth Taylor. He's a very accomplished and erudite gentleman. He is an investigative journalist and geopolitical analyst and broadcaster. Pelle has written books on the assassination of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, as well as on the very suspicious death of Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. Two very interesting books. And he's also written a book on the history of diplomacy during World War I believe it's World War I. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome him, and we're going to look at how the British establishment shapes media narratives, which is really a hot topic for discussion. President Trump has even sent over a team from America to the UK to assess the state of freedom of speech in the United Kingdom today, which is obviously concerning him, and quite rightfully. And so whether platforms, alternative television channels, and platforms such as YouTube and Substack can challenge the current sort of mainstream media narratives. And another subject of Pelle's, we're also going to touch on South Africa and the claims of a white genocide there. So hold on, and I will bring Pelle into the conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. So once again, Pelle, welcome. It's great to see you again. You've been on my show a couple of times, I believe, and it's lovely to have you back. Particularly in this current very heated environment where President Trump has even sent a delegation of, I believe, 5 people over to assess the state of free speech in the United Kingdom. Oh my God, what is going on? People have criticized, why is he sticking his nose in our business? And the best explanation I've heard was someone who said, everything in America comes from here. And, it's like a friend who cares deeply about you and needs to say something when you've gone off the track and you're headed in the wrong direction. They get concerned, and even though you don't welcome it, they're going to take a look and tell you what they think you're doing wrong. So that's a pretty good explanation. How would you describe the relationship today between the British establishment and the mainstream media?
Well, just sorry to your first point about the British and American conflict. Don't forget that the Americans and the British were adversaries for much of the 19th century. You could be British without being in favor of the British government. So the first American president was George Washington said, "I'm British, but I don't approve of the." And you could see American foreign policy as ever since of the American identity. Do you oppose your father, or do you become like your father? And Alexander Hamilton, and all the imperial instincts of America wanting to become a superpower, as it were, on the British model, versus the idea that you should be a superior republic that doesn't get entangled in European affairs. And that's characterized. It's been on the back foot since the Second World War, when America became firmly Atlanticist. I think what happened was that the the Brits sort of captured the American elite after World War One, with the Council of Foreign Relations and which is an offshoot of Chatham House. And I think that, but now what we're seeing is the isolationists who were very strong after World War One and before World War Two, who are sort of heirs of the old American isolationist Republican tradition. They're now very strong in the American Republican Party, and I think that they see that what Trump is doing, intervening in British politics, is only payback for first MI6's intervention into American politics, basically trying to topple Trump. I mean, a lot of this Russiagate stuff was born in Europe. Basically, what MI6 did in around 2015 was gather up witness testimonies from Estonian intelligence and basically construct this narrative of the the Russia had the goods on Trump, and I think that there's an interesting there's a talk, and I'll get to the point about British mainstream media in a moment. There was an American journalist who hung around Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago. I can find him. His name is George something, and he said that the vibes that's going, the people, the corridor talk at Mar-a-Lago is kill Mossad and kill MI6. So that's the kind of proxy for get rid of Israeli, or let's punish the Israelis. I don't want to really talk about Israel, but I could talk about Britain, punish the British as well. And so I think that I think a lot of Trumpists blame the Brits for dragging America into and escalating the Ukraine war. They see the Brits as trying to entrap them into the war, into escalations. They semi-successfully did that with Biden, with the firing of those Storm Shadow missiles. And they also feel that Starmer basically wanted to rattle them, use American missiles, use American brawn, and be the British brain against all that. And one of the things, apart from they tried to topple Trump the first time round, was that they tried to sway the election away from Trump by supporting Harris by sending a
But how does
sorry.
this? I'm sorry to cut over you, but how does this relate to what I asked you, the
I'm
relationship?
gonna answer that point. Morgan McSweeney was sent to Washington to Center of Digital Hate to impose this legislation that would be right at odds with what the American traditions of free speech. Now, the British mainstream media will not tell you any of this narrative, and I think that the British media, if you live in the British media bubble, and that's why I'm not doing it anymore, you basically live in a bubble that feeds back to politicians their own prejudices, and it doesn't challenge them enough. And I think that at some point, I mean, media. What are the roles of the media? It benefits the politicians, not necessarily the public, but it benefits the politicians if the media do what you tell them. Fine, but it doesn't. It benefits them only up to the point, because when the media stops, only reflects back at you what you're telling them, then you're actually deaf, dumb, and blind about what's actually going on in the world. And I think that a lot of the missteps that the British have done, I mean, the British diplomatic position, I said, outside Europe has gone down quite a lot, with a lot of the BRICS nations siding with Russia and Trump, sort of becoming part of this wider superpower outside Europe constellation. And I don't think the Brits even don't seem even to be aware of that.
Yeah,
And
but
I think
what
that,
I asked
yeah.
was, what is the relationship between the British establishment and the mainstream media today?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the British establishment. All I can say is from an outside position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your view?
What I see is a country that doesn't have the Germans speak Fingerspitzgefühl, a feeling, can't read the room, can't really understand what the world is, what's happening in the world. And I don't see that they understand Trump.
Who can't read the room?
Well, I mean, the British establishment. I mean, I see the British as the last woke globalists in the world. The British establishment is the globalist empire. I mean, the globalist empire, it's partly New York, partly London, but I mean, it has got Anglo roots. And I think it's the Democrat Party is the British Party in America, and they're out of power now. And the British, basically, the 20th century and much of the 21st century has been the British century. And I think that now, with the arrival of Trump, with the arrival of BRICS, I think those tentacles are being cut off one by one. And I'm wondering whether the British, as I said, the British need a media that's adversarial towards the political class and explains to them what the world actually looks like, so that you don't actually have to go to podcasts or small channels or whatever, which is increasingly what people are doing. And they're not so small anymore. I mean, I think what's happening is that people going to Musk's Twitter, they're going to podcasts like the Duran or John Mearsheimer or Redacted. I mean, these people, or Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has, what is it, 40 million subscribers. Musk has 200 million subscribers. These people dwarf the Sunday Times reach or even the Daily Mirror and so on. But so I think the Americans get their news a different, a totally, the reason why they voted for Trump, the reason why they're not so pro-Ukrainian as the British are, is that they get their sources of news from a different place than the British do. I feel that the British are a bit closed off and isolated.
What about language? What role does that play in narrative control? I mean, words like populist and extremist
Well,
and
yeah, sure. I mean, and even
conspiracy
woke.
theorists, they seem to
Exactly.
me, Pelle, to shut down debate more than they inform.
Well, I think that words like far right, which basically explains views on immigration that were considered completely normal, decades ago. Far right is one of those little weasel words that they sneak into almost every article. I've worked as a sub-editor with one or two words. You can change an article into almost completely the opposite meaning, just by
Sure,
inserting. And the
sure.
British are experts at that. I mean, you can read a BBC report about, let's say, the latest. I think that the British, the regard one used to have for the British for being objective and so on, I don't think that's true anymore. And maybe it was never true. I mean, maybe everyone is a propagandist, but it's now that people have things to compare with. I don't think that when you read the BBC or Sky News, you feel you're getting an objective view. I mean, I think you should. The thing to do is to read, Russia Today and the BBC and realize they're both propaganda, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But through judicious choice of reading the BBC, you can
Okay.
realize it's not trustworthy, I don't think.
What about so-called alternative media from independent YouTubers to Substack writers? Is this truly independent journalism, or are we simply seeing a new form of echo chamber?
Well, I think it's like caveat emptor when you consume the media, and that is you've got to take lots of different sources, and then you've got to be your own best judge. The only the problem is, though, of course, most people have real lives. Most media people are not media critics. Most people just want to switch on the box at the end of the day, and the nearest and what happens when they flick on the switch is the BBC. Unfortunately. So I don't see any solution to this except, I mean, I read all kinds of media and I make a balanced judgment, a judgment of probabilities basically, and then a kind of mentally cross-check with other narratives and stories I know. Um, but the alternative media, yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that if the alternative media is paid for, and there might be some oligarchs behind the alternative media, in any case, it's no worse than the mainstream media. So, I mean, at the very worst, it's a kind of propaganda mixed with truth, or propaganda. I mean, telling the truth by failing to tell the whole story. That's often the way the media lies. I mean, they don't lie outright. They usually lie by angling the language or withholding certain facts or failing to tell the whole context. You can't know everything. You can't know anything unless you know everything, as it were. I mean, but the job of a journalist is to report as fairly about the whole story without boring readers or assuming too much of their time. Um, but I think that the alternative media that I've been doing is basically talking to a lot of forgotten or excluded voices, for instance, and trying. And the thing is, the trouble is, to me, and I spent quite a lot of time thinking about this, is to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, because some people are fantasists, some people are conspiracy theorists, and they spend a lot of time, but you don't know in advance. And I'm a bit of a sort of like a patron saint of people with lost causes. I'll hear them out, and sometimes they're very good, and sometimes they're not so good. But I mean, the assumption is that lots of Galileos out there, lots of people with real stories to tell, real theories about where power resides, or they've got some little scandal that they're sitting on. And sometimes they're lying, sometimes they have backers or whatever. But you can't know unless you hear them out. So the truth is bigger than what the mainstream media tell you, but it's not quite as capacious as some people who believe that the moon is, made of cheese or chemtrails exist and so on. But some of those things are actually true. I mean, psychological operations do happen. Assassinations, we do carry out assassinations in the West. That's not a conspiracy theory. Whereas the fact that the moon landing didn't happen, I do think it's a conspiracy theory. Although I think that some people make amusingly convincing cases for it. But you've got to realize that the alternative media has got to be out there exploring truths that the mainstream media don't. And then it's up to, and that's so it's very useful to watch people like us. But you have to trust us, have a faith in us that we're sort of genuine explorers and that we sometimes get it wrong. I mean, it's a hypothesis. I was trained in science,
So
and
people like us are the solution.
sorry,
So people like us are the solution.
absolutely, yeah, we are. Yes, we are. I think we. I would say I wouldn't trust the mainstream media, especially. I mean, I think they've really made a mess of the Ukraine conflict. I think they've really brought Britain to where it is right now. I think that I don't want to go into the history of it, but I mean, um, the we we will save Britain basically, I think, because we will give people back the eyes and ears that they need to make democratic choices and informed choices and hold their politicians to account. You know, where is this? What happened with those Ukrainian models who set fire to Keir Starmer's car? I mean, the rumors all over X that he's homosexual. And one of the problems in the UK, but not in America, is that there's the tightly scripted. I don't know if D notices have gone out to all the media, but Craig Murray's been speculating about it, and I don't. It might not necessarily that they're his homosexual lovers or whatever, but the problem with Britain is that you've got a very tight D-notice system. You've got the politicians quite close to the media, who are quite close to the intelligence services, and it's all it's a terrible mess. And so I think that when America sends its people into Britain to explore the censorship there, I think there's a variety of reasons. There's a feeling that Britain's a mother country. Britain is the father of globalism. Britain has a deep state that is every bit as powerful as the American deep state. And if you want to cut off the snake at the head, not just the Hydra's tentacles in Washington, or vice versa, but they work very closely together. And it's part of the culture wars. Charlie Kirk was in the UK recently, and he was asking people. He went to Cambridge, and Cambridge were telling him that women can have prostates. So I mean that you can't get away with that in America anymore. So, but Britain is. There's an interesting study in the FT where they showed the level of progressivism among young people in different countries, and it had gone up everywhere, of course, since early 2010s. But the country which had become most liberal, if whatever you want it, woke, was Britain, especially British young women.
Yeah.
So Britain is, in a way, the capital of woke. It's the capital of globalism, the capital of finance, and so on. And still, and with lots of powerful zones of tentacles of influence, many of which are detrimental to the MAGA movement's interests. And I think they see that and they want to hit out. And it's popular, I think, with the MAGA movement. There's so much anger over the Southport attacks because the police were suggesting to the American normal citizens that they might be arrested and flown over to Britain because they'd made some disobliging remark about the British police or about immigration on Twitter, and they say, we've got the First Amendments. We know you live in a 1984 state, Britain, but that's none of your business what we can do in America. So there was a lot of anger there
Yeah.
towards Britain. And I felt so maybe these people are doing, and maybe it's just one of those things you can put pressure on the British on, and then maybe extract other concessions in another area and embarrassing Britain. But it's very interesting because I've grown up all my adult life and childhood is the special relationship is inviolate, the stable core of international relations, but we're definitely not seeing that anymore.
Yeah. Let's move now to South Africa. You've reported from that country. You've made two documentaries there, and while it's facing huge challenges, some of the narratives that are spreading online are misleading or exaggerated, particularly around the idea of a white genocide. Let's maybe dig into that, Pele.
Well,
Is
I
there
mean,
is there any
yeah, no,
credible is there any credible evidence that a white genocide is actually happening in South Africa?
no, I don't think it's a genocide. That's totally misleading.
Okay.
But I think what Trump to sort of
If it's not a
to explain
genocide,
Trump, sorry.
if it's not a genocide, how would you describe the
Well,
actual situation for white
it's
South Africans, particularly around violent crime and land reform and generally government rhetoric?
well, the government, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, there's a growing impoverished class of South Africans, some people living in squatters camps, but I'd say that the living standard and the income per capita is still much higher. So we've got to be balanced here, okay? There's a very large number of murders of farmers. Thousands have been killed, and there's a hill somewhere where they put up all these crosses where they're not actually buried, but it commemorates them.
Yeah.
And of course, South African whites produce most of South Africa's agricultural produce. Um, there have been many instances where they've been taken over by blacks who say that their ancestors lived there, but it's often on their say so. I mean, they're saying, well, my ancestors grazed here, but there's often no proof. You know, they didn't have a piece of paper or anything. And nearly in every case, the farm is taken over. It's turned into a shebeen, a drinking den, and the combine harvesters and everything, you know, rust away. And so, and dozens or hundreds of jobs are lost. So, I mean, the black South Africa loses from these farms being converted. Then there's a lot of murders of whites. I think I've heard somewhere that white farmers have a higher murder rate than any country in the world outside a war zone. So it's like 150 per 100,000. Um, but it's not a genocide. I mean, genocide is like tens of thousands of people being slaughtered. Many white South Africans still living there. They live admittedly in white compounds, in mostly white compounds areas, nice fashionable areas. They're festooned with little signs saying that guards will come in 90 seconds. The South African police, since they've been taken over by the ANC, are totally useless. And but they have these armed
Friends of mine say that South Africa is the only country where the police often arrive before a crime has been reported.
right. um, yeah, well, they're part of the criminal class, right? Well, I mean, but they have efficient sort of ex-army people who patrol at a price, and I mean, people when I was there, they warned me for walking around the streets even during the daytime, but it was okay. And some people said they regaled me with horror stories. This is somebody was shot in that chair you were sitting in a restaurant. You can see the window, the bullet there happened last year. Somebody said some people have lost relatives. You know, they say, oh yeah, my aunt was killed and then my uncle was killed. And then other people said, well, I've lived here 50 years and nothing has ever happened to me. But definitely, I mean, I think the average murder rate is in the West, in Europe, is like one per 100,000, or even in Sweden, you know, with its famed gang attacks and so on, has got about 1.5. So although it's a big increase in Swedish terms, you know, 50%, it's still much below South Africa, which is about 40 per 100,000. And you compare that to the white farmers, which is 150 per 100,000. A war zone is 100 per 100,000. Most of those shootings are black on black, by the way. So it's like a nuance. I mean, it's not as if it's not turning into Zimbabwe at the moment, although there are fears about that, where the whites are leaving wholesale. I mean, I think the white population is still about 5 million, but South Africa's black population has grown enormously. But I mean, it's still there's no net exodus. It's not like Zimbabwe where there hardly any whites left and they had all their property nationalized. I think some of the firebrands are talking about compulsory expropriation of white property, but I don't think it's happened yet. So they're tenuously holding on, I would say. But that again doesn't describe it because you can have a very good life as a white still in South Africa, and there are some white companies that are still connected to the global economy or still very connected. Some very bright white South Africans and a sort of small but growing black elite, and they live in quite well and they feel quite loyal to their country. And I was surprised how switched on they were. I mean, they're very sort of they knew all the debates going on in the United States and in Britain and so on because they all have the internet and as I said, they have servants still and some have big houses and so on. So it's like a mixed picture. You can't just say that it's yeah, but you probably know that, or I mean, so that speech by Trump didn't capture the nuances, but I think it was a rhetorical device to grab people's attention, maybe.
But
To be
why
fair
has
to him.
this narrative gained so much traction internationally, especially among Western audiences? Why
Well,
do
I
you
mean, I think
think?
there's a Well, I think there's a worry in Europe that, I mean, and I've said it myself. I mean, Africa's got the South Africans are receiving huge amounts of immigration from the west of Africa, living in squatter camps, so there's not enough jobs. Africa's population is going to rise to 4.2 billion by 2050. It was 300 million when I was growing up. So, I mean, half the size of Europe, and it's going to be 5 times the size of Europe within my lifetime. And the Straits of Gibraltar are just a couple of kilometers away from the coast. Because there's this fear that we'll all be South Africanized, and that the sort of white replacement or the pressure on the whites is going to happen to us in some way. And I think so. It was he mentioned that because he was. I'm actually I'm glad that Trump made it into a big issue because it's always been there, and I've been trying to consciousness raise about it. I mean, I said it's very difficult. I say you don't have to be a racist or anything to realize that this large expansion of a population that's not very well educated and so on and doesn't integrate well into the modern industrial economy is something that is difficult for us, you know. And so Trump has made that a discussable subject, and probably under the pressure of Elon Musk,
Yeah,
who talks about the demographic implosion of whites everywhere in the world, partly due to feminism, and but in other parts of the world, it's still growing fast.
yeah, but especially from his own country.
Right.
Okay, Pele, thank you so much. We've run out of time, but as always, it was absolutely fascinating.
Great.
Love to have you. And I mean, you move fast and you cover a plethora of subjects replete with facts and interesting stories. It's really it's great, and yeah, they're such big questions. One really doesn't know what to do with them. But I
Mm,
thank you very much, and
absolutely.
we'll see you back here soon.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Roger. Good to see
Thank
you
you.
again. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye now. Bye.
Well, that's it, folks. Thank you very much for listening in, and we'll see you again next Friday at 6 p.m. British Summer Time, when we'll have another fascinating guest for you. And this is Roger Gewald saying goodbye from the Gospel according to Dr. Roger.